Hi, I'm Joe Mimran, and welcome back to the Export Impact podcast. Entrepreneurship isn't for the faint of heart. It takes courage, creativity, and perseverance to start a business and help it grow. But what if you also had to overcome barriers of gender, race, or immigration status? How can you navigate the challenges and opportunities of being a minority entrepreneur in Canada and beyond? That's what we're going to explore today with our guest, Nita Tandon. Nita is the founder and CEO of Dalcini Stainless, an award-winning brand that specializes in durable, chemical-free, and eco-friendly housewares. She's going to share her insights and perspectives with us about just what it takes to make it as a Canadian entrepreneur. I'd like to begin today's episode by acknowledging that we're recording from my office in Toronto, which is on the traditional unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We value taking this moment to deepen the appreciation of our Indigenous communities wherever we are and to remind ourselves of our shared debt to Canada's First Peoples. Welcome, Nita.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. And before I get started, it was very interesting to read that you are actually from the pharmaceutical science field. So I'm curious to know how you went from that to stainless steel home products.
Well, it wasn't a logical step for sure. I didn't actually leave pharmaceutical to start becoming an entrepreneur. It was more, I left pharmaceutical, but when I left was just at the time when BPA was being banned around the world. And so having access to all the medical journals, all the top research, everything was talking about BPA. And Canada banned it in baby bottles, but they didn't ban it in anything else. And so for me, when I ended up having my child, I knew I didn't want those chemicals around my daughter. So it really became a necessity. I just thought, if I know better, then I need to do better. And when I went looking for options, everything for kids has chemicals on it. I mean, how can we say that we really want to protect our kids, but we are putting dyes, BPA, lead in kids' toys, in paint, all of these things. And so that was really my start. When I looked around, I couldn't find it. And so I went back to my roots and said, what if I created it? And in India, they use stainless steel a lot. So that was really my starting point. So I mixed my ethnicity, my pharmaceutical science, and my practicality of being a mom all into one.
That's so interesting. And I was going to ask why stainless steel? Because it's not the logical sort of next step. It wouldn't be stainless steel. It would be a PBA-free plastic of some sort, or glass would be what you would normally go to, because stainless steel, I had always equated it with more outdoor camping products. So was India that really drove that thought process?
It was. And so India used stainless steel for years. It was eco-friendly. It was chemical-free, all of that. It was the durability why India used it. I mean, they just didn't want to have to replace dishes on a regular basis. And in India, they also have dishes that is for the entire family. You didn't separate kids' dishes versus family dishes. Generally, when women get married, they would get a set of stainless steel dishes. And these were the ones that you would use your entire lifetime. And even when a child is born, they often give a stainless steel cup, and that's the baby cup that they keep for their lifetime. And so it really was this idea that I wanted something very clean. But Joe, it's interesting that you mentioned about BPA free. Again, it's the science that sort of rang true for me, which is there's a number of different bisphenols, which is the chemical class. And when they say BPA free, they generally replace it with another chemical. It's another bisphenol. And so products that are BPA free are not actually safer. They're just BPA free. All plastic is synthetic. It's made with different chemicals. And so many of the ones that say BPA free has been replaced with BPS or BPS, still with bisphenols.
So what products exactly do you have in your lineup? I mean, what do you do in terms of a drink bottle?
You can actually have a stainless steel drink bottle.
Do you sell that as a stainless steel drink bottle for babies?
I mean, I have one. But there's a lot of rules about bringing a product to market for babies. And so there's a lot of approval, which has a lot of cost and time involved. And so it's there. I just need to do a few other things before I can bring it to market.
Oh, I see. So you're working on that as an item. So that's interesting too, that you went from, again, pharmaceutical science to developing products and designing products. How did you make that transition? And what difficulties did you have in creating these new products when you hadn't?
I looked at in my cupboard and I looked at products that I have of stainless steel. Now, the thing is, most people are like shocked and they go, stainless steel, is that metal? But generally, what are you eating with every night? I mean, you're generally eating with the stainless steel fork and cutlery. And so we think of it okay in certain areas of being safe. And then suddenly when it comes to dishes, we think of it being different. And when we look at surgical tools, it's always stainless steel. When you look at milk vats and even alcohol, all of that, it's always manufacturing facilities are done with stainless steel. And the reason is because it's naturally antibacterial. And so that was the start for me to say, if it's the product that people use when they're doing, you go to your dentist and you get your teeth cleaned, and it's the product that's used because it's so clean, why can't I use that same product to make dishes? And what I really wanted was also something that looked pretty. I didn't want it to have the feel of campwear. And camping is generally done with aluminum, and it's light in weight and all of that.
I see. I was confused. You see, I thought it was stainless steel that went into campware. I didn't realize that it was aluminum. So that's also super interesting. But, every genesis of a business, not every, but so many, is from problem solving. When we started Club Monaco, I was looking for a 100% cotton plain white shirt that was properly cut. And back in 1984, believe it or not, they didn't do 100% cotton. It wasn't easy to find, and certainly at a good price from the cut that we were looking for. You're always looking to solve a problem, and that's a genesis of a business. And you started selling in Canada, and then you decided you wanted to export into the US. So tell us about how that went. What were the different challenges you faced between selling in Canada versus the US?
It was easier in the US for me. And the reason being is that California is already ahead of the curve when it comes to reducing plastic and understanding the chemicals on products. They already have legislation in place. And so I didn't have to educate my customer on BPA or some of these other chemicals, phthalates, all of that type of stuff. And so they found me very quickly. I figured out just by Googling how to get all of my codes ready. And with an e-commerce business, you can actually export fairly quickly. There isn't a lot of logistics in place. And so I exported right from the get-go. And then in Canada, in 2015, people didn't really even understand the word sustainability. No one was talking. And so I had to spend a lot of time just on social media educating. When I first started the company, it was really my daughter was taking naps and I would sit on the computer and figure, if I had to speak to a friend, what would I tell them about this product? And I knew nothing. I mean, social media is not my generation at all, but I just created accounts much later in life and just played around with it. And it became very organic. I didn't have paid traffic or anything. That's just a very new thing for me, paid traffic. But it was really just talking to other moms about what was in products.
And so you built a little bit of a community and got the word out there. And it's interesting that the US was easier than Canada, because usually when you're shipping into the US, you've got cross-border issues and you've got all kinds of warehousing issues. And sometimes the quantities can be bigger too than in Canada. And so that puts a financial strain on the business early on. So it's interesting that you were able to get better traction in the US.
It's interesting because I think a lot of times when people think of export, they really think on such a big scale. You're thinking of getting into big box stores and volume and all of that. And really for me, export was selling one container to one family. And so anything under $800, there's really not a whole lot of logistics to. There's no tariffs. There's nothing really. So if I had UPS or Canada Post, they would even help me out and say, this is what you need. And as long as I had my HS code, and after a couple of deliveries went through, no issue, I just started sending more.
And now you're selling retail stores across the US?
I just got into Lowe's USA, and so very excited about that. And I mean, they have 2,200 stores across the US. And so the goal is to get into all 2,200 stores, but we're not there yet.
No, that would be quite a win. 2,200 stores selling your product. The name Dalcini, how did you come up with it?
So the word Dalcini, so I'll say my husband is Italian. So we wanted sort of an Italian looking name, but the word Dalcini actually means cinnamon. And the reason I wanted the company to be called Cinnamon is because I wanted some reference to India, but I didn't want it to be an ethnic product. And so I look at cinnamon, for example, and I say, but every household has cinnamon in it, but they don't think of it as an ethnic product. People just like it. And it's used in so many different ways. And I said, that's what I wanted for stainless steel. I don't want people to bring it in their homes and say, I have this ethnic product, but I just want you to have it in your home. And so to me, my goal was that no one else would know what this word meant, but my goal was always to have stainless steel in the home and be in the home just the way cinnamon is.
Yeah, it's an Italian product with a English definition from an Indian thought process.
Exactly.
That's fantastic, and it works. Now, I alluded to this when I introduced you today, and that is the challenges that a woman or a minority faces in business, and a unique set of challenges for many fall in that category. What has been some of the challenges you've faced, and can you sort of cite some specific examples?
I mean, the biggest challenge is getting financing. And so generally female-owned companies don't get the same kind of capital investment. And so that less than 2% of VC funding goes towards women, and even less if you are visible minority. And so starting point, that's always a challenge. Now, for me, I had a long history with a particular bank. And so everyone was telling me, no bank is going to fund this. It's not going to happen. I actually had the opposite, which was I went into the bank. I wanted to separate my personal from my business. And I didn't come in with a business plan or anything. It was just I was opening 2 separate accounts. And the business account person said to me, well, would you like a little bit of a cash injection to start your business? And that was a shock to me. And so I realized that my story isn't typical to a lot of women, but I think it's because I had good credit. And they had seen a history of I pay my bills. They were able to look at that. And so I think if I'd say anything to women, or people in general, is make sure you have good credit. I mean, it's sort of the foundation to starting a business is people want to be able to trust you before they trust the business.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly good advice. I've never been to a bank where they automatically want to give you money unless you have money already in the bank. So you must have had something there that would give them that kind of confidence. But you raise this issue of less than 2% of VC funding goes to women. I think hopefully there's enough attention to this issue that things are changing. I'm sure now that you're growing your business, you're having to find more funding. And as you do that, where are you finding support? What are the resources you're going to get that support? And again, this could be a big help for any of the female listeners.
So back to when you were saying, what are sort of the challenges that women find? I would say one of them is the grants and things that are to help entrepreneurs generally are catered to male-dominated businesses. So energy sector, when they look at IT, even if it's manufacturing car parts. And so when I went to the government looking for some of the same assistance that my male counterparts were getting, I was always funneled into the wrong section. And they said, we don't have a category for you. Because if I would say anything about stainless steel, they'd put me into automotive. If I said anything about sustainability, it was sustainability grants are only for energy. And so I just feel sometimes I think there needs to be a look in every single sector and say, is this really equal? Are we really fairly giving grants and finances and assistance equally across the board? So I would just say that there are some challenges with female-owned businesses. And where I found support was with other females that were having the same struggle. And you just share what's worked for you and how can you help me? And networking, I think, has been the best outlet for me.
And so EDC, they obviously stepped up to the challenge. I know that EDC has a mandate to assist female entrepreneurs, BIPOC entrepreneurs, and I think that they've done an amazing job. One of the wonderful things about doing this podcast is that I get to interview so many CEOs across Canada. And I see the support that EDC has provided, not just the capital, but also support within each of the countries that they operate in. And they also have a great networking capabilities with other government agencies. And so I think that they've done an amazing job at doing that. And this other notion of networking and the importance of that, I so strongly believe in networking. I think that really will help entrepreneurs. You never know where your next great piece of advice is going to come from, or introductions, or just idea, just by kicking things around with other entrepreneurs. And it's such a struggle. I got to see a lot of that when I was on Dragon's Den and saw so many immigrants and so many budding entrepreneurs of color and females who came on the show, and just how much they wanted to succeed, how much the dream that they had and how they wanted to pursue that dream. And we always wanted to give money to everyone that came on the show. Actually, it was not good because I have such a love for people who really want to make it on their own and take that challenge, because it is a big challenge.
It is. I mean, I think it's one of those areas where most people will say they don't really like networking because they don't like talking about themselves. But when you get the right group, it isn't even talking about your successes anymore. It's who do you feel comfortable to talk about your struggles? And that's when you get help. And I think networking has such a connotation to it. But it's really, who's your network? Who do you go to and who can you be honest with to be able to get the support that you need?
I call it sometimes giving tough love, right? Because you do sometimes, one of the criticisms is they sometimes are blind to the fact that they are pursuing a dream that perhaps there is no market for. And they're so blinded by their own innovation or their own idea that they forget that they've really got to serve the market, or else they won't be successful. And the other thing is just raising capital. Entrepreneurs spend so much of their time just trying to raise capital, which I think you were lucky that you were able to get the capital from the bank initially.
They want to help, but they don't know how to help. I mean, I'll give you an example. A very specific example was during the pandemic, the borders were closed for personal travel. The borders were never closed for business. And so I have a satellite office and I'm very close to a border and a satellite office there. And I was doing a deal with Good Morning America, and some things needed to get signed across the border and I needed to go over. I went to the border and I said, this is what I'm doing. And they said, no, it's not for that kind of a business. Like, this is for like big business only. And I said, well, no, I am. And I had called ahead of time and asked them specifically, what do I need? And I'm also very cognizant that when I speak, I sound white. And I do think there's a difference when I suddenly get to the border and I'm not what they're expecting. And they told me that I wasn't allowed to go across the border. They said it's not for my type of business. And so that preconceived notion was I just didn't look like a business person to them. So I was escorted back to Canada. And even though I was doing a deal and I said, here, I can show you some emails. And they said, we don't want to see them. They wouldn't even look at my registration because that person I'd spoken to on the phone said, make sure you bring this, blah, blah, blah. I don't take that lightly. So I come back and of course my husband's saying, don't, they've got a lot of power. Like, do you really want to go down that road and just do business in Canada? And I thought, no, because then I'm not changing it for the next generation. There's going to be women that come after me and we're always going to be with the same status quo. And so I came back, I sat and thought about it and I called them up. I spoke to the same person I'd spoken to before and I told him exactly what happened. I told him the time that I was there. I told him who I spoke to, what happened, everything. And he apologized. And he said, this country is absolutely open to people like you. I'd like you to consider coming back. And so it's how you change the system. I will say the same thing happened when I came back to Canada. Now, the Canadian said to me, you're not business. The only people that can come through are truckers. And I thought, well, like, we need to change the definition of trade. We need to change the definition of business, and we need to change the view of what business looks like. Because if you still Google it today, the images that come up is very much male in a blue business suit with a white shirt. That's not what I am. So it doesn't mean that I'm not business. It means that we need to change that definition.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that you're willing to go to the mats and I'd say make that, say, struggle on behalf of all women, kudos to you. And I think it's going to help all of the others that follow behind you. I have to say personally that my business, and I've been in business for way too many years, I've always hired women. About 85% of my workforce has been women. So I understand the capabilities and the power and the ingenuity and the business that women do provide. And I've only had the best of experiences. So I don't get it when it doesn't translate out there in the rest of the world.
And I think there's this new generation too, that they don't see division of races and gender and all of that. I think this really sometimes it will eventually evolve. But I think right now there's a lot of people that grew up without the diversity that we see in today's culture. And so they still have these preconceived notions. Every time I did cross the border in the small town, they've always been very good to me. So I don't think this is a racist thing. I think it's preconceived notions. It's an unconscious bias that happens.
Well, on that note, tell me, what advice would you give other women's entrepreneurs, BIPOC entrepreneurs looking to make a name for themselves?
Well, I would say stick to your guns. I would say women have a real ability to, one, I'd say multitask, to be able to have a vision sort of of where you want to go. And I would say stick to that. And you're probably going to get a lot of people that say business is not done that way, or you should do it this way. And take all those things in consideration. But if you really feel strongly about something, go with it. And another example is when I had the manufacturer set up, I called quite a few of them and I said, this is my designs, but I need to make sure, is there any child labor, and had my different questions. And the first couple of them would not even answer that. The other one that I worked with said, I have never been asked this question. And I thought, well, you maybe not worked with a woman. I mean, I didn't want my child to benefit on the backs of someone else's. And so to me, it was very important. And so I would just say, if it's sort of a nagging piece that you think is going to make your business, stick with it. Just keep going. And I would also say that even if there's doors that seem like they're closed, be honest and open to have the conversation, because most people want to help you. They don't even know what the disadvantages or what the roadblocks are.
So stick to your guns, have a vision, and don't take no for an answer.
Don't take no ever for an answer. And have good credit.
Yes, good credit. So important. My thanks to Nita Tandon, founder and CEO of Dalcini Stainless. Your perspective was greatly needed, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and having this conversation.
Thanks for joining us today on the Export Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. See you back here in 2 weeks.